It's a little intimidating, maybe, to tie a fly called the Beauty. It had better be beautiful, I guess, when I'm finished. Not that all the flies shouldn't be beautiful, and I should take as much care with every fly as I do with this one. I am tying this fly from the illustration in Mary Orvis Marbury's book, Favorite Flies and Their Histories, as it was illustrated by her father, Charles Orvis. I'm tying it on a number 12 hook with red thread. I'm using red thread because the head on the fly is red, and I suppose I could just tie in some red thread for the head, but I think I know I can cover the thread that's on the shank of the hook. Everything but the body of this fly is Guinea Fowl, so I have a half skin of Guinea, and that does pose a little bit of a not really a problem, but a challenge when it comes to tying the wing. So for the tail, I just have some fibers off the bottom of a feather, and I want the tail about the shank length. Catch those in, and if I hold the fibers forward just a little bit as I wrap around them, then it keeps them from wrapping across the back of the hook, keeps them on top of the hook. And I can cut out the butt ends. For the body of the fly, I am using gray wool yarn. This is crewel yarn. I think I'm okay with wool since wool was commonly used as a body material in the 1890s and before. The illustration does have just kind of a fullish gray body, so I'm going to achieve that with this wool yarn. And what I'm going to do is put on a few layers to kind of build up the body, try to imitate that illustration as best as possible. Maybe I'm getting too thick, but I think I'm okay. And catch off that yarn. I want to make sure I'm leaving plenty of space behind the hook eye to tie in the hackle and the wings. For the front hackle, I have this feather, maybe not as strongly dotted as the illustration shows, but there aren't a lot of feathers on that skin that have shorter fibers on them for this front hackle. I am tying it kind of in a soft hackle wet fly fashion, although I don't know that this was necessarily a wet fly. I don't know that there was a big distinction actually back then about wet and dry. Maybe more than I can find. But I'm just grabbing that tip with my pliers, holding everything back as I clip out that tip. All I want is a little triangle there. What I have kind of discovered is that this guinea feather doesn't like to cooperate quite as well as a hen hackle does. Those feathers don't like to pull back, or even now when I'm wrapping the hackle, they don't really like to get pulled towards the hook bend. But I will do the best I can to get those to lean backwards towards the bend of the hook to mimic the illustration, and wrap up until I'm out of fibers on that stem. I pulled off the fluff and some of the fibers off the bottom of the stem to get what I thought would be the right amount of fibers for this hackle. And it's kind of a guess. As the more you do it, the more you realize exactly how many fibers you're going to need. And then I'll just pull back on everything and wrap up over that. Try not to wrap those fibers in. Ones underneath of the hook always give me some trouble. I don't know what it is about my fingers not being able to grab them well. I do like to snap out these stems, but this is a pretty heavy stem and I don't think it's going to snap very well. So I'll just reach in there and clip it out. I can just kind of push down on those. For the wings, I am using a wing feather. Now this is where I had to find a feather that has fibers that are about the same length on both sides. The short side of this wing has fibers that are long enough for this size of a hook, but buying only half a skin means that I don't have opposing feathers to use. So I had to find one that has fibers that are the same size approximately so that I can lay back to back for the wing. So I cut two pieces, one from each side of that wing, lay them back to back, and then measure approximately the length of the hook. Now here's where I need to really be careful not to crowd that hook eye. So I'm going to wrap back up over, try to get away from the hook eye and not catch in hackle fibers at the same time. Loose wrap and then cinch down, and then come back in and clip out those butt ends. Try to pull back on those hackle fibers too. And then I can wrap up over those butt ends and wrap the head. And the illustrations on these flies show a fairly square head. And that's because when the flies were tied, they didn't have eyes on their hooks. And so they had to tie in a piece of gut. And that's what it looked like. So then I'll put a whip finish on that. For the head cement, I use a diluted goop. Just dip a needle in my jar, drop that and drop on the head, and when that dries, it will dry clear. Right now it looks darker than the red, but it will dry a nice clear red. The Beauty, from Mary Orvis Marbury's book, Favorite Flies and Their Histories, as illustrated by her father, Charles Orvis.